Montana Territory, May of 1881, the wind ran cold through the Judith Basin. But it was nothing compared to the chill that had settled between Zella Norwood and the town that once welcomed her with smiles. Zella stood on the porch of the small cabin she and her husband had built 3 years ago, her hands folded tight over her apron. There were no children's cries from inside, no tiny boots by the door. Just the creak of the rocking chair behind her and the sound of horse hooves crunching the dry earth. The rider came into view tall, broad-shouldered, dust caked on his coat. Harlan Sutton, her husband. He swung down from his bay mare, his hat low over his dark hair, and tied the reins to the rail. He looked tired, but when he saw her standing there, his face softened. "Zella," he said, voice low and warm. She stepped forward, brushing hair from her face. "You are back early." They moved the branding up. "Calves are smaller this year," he said, setting down his saddlebag. Then he reached for her hand. "You been all right," she hesitated. "Someone came by while you were gone," he frowned. "Who, your brother?" Harlan tense, jaw tightening. "He said I should let you go," she said, "that you deserve a family, children. A real home." Harlan looked straight at her, eyes steady. "I married you, not your womb." Zella's breath caught. He stepped closer, wrapping his arms around her. "Do not ever let anyone make you think you are less, Zella, not for this, not ever." Tears filled her eyes, but she blinked them away. "You should not have to defend me." "I do not mind it," he said. "I will keep doing it if I have to." That night they sat together by the fire, her tucked against his side, the scent of smoke and pine in the air. Harlan's hand rested over hers, fingers laced. He had never been a man of many words, but when he spoke, she heard the truth in it. "I am not leaving you," he said. "Not now, not ever." But the town did not forget. At the general store, whispers followed Zella like dust on her boots. She kept her head high, but it wore on her. The glances. The forced smiles. The women who turned away when she passed. One afternoon, as she stood in line, a woman behind her muttered, "Such a shame, pretty girl like that, no babies to show for it." Zella turned, eyes sharp. "You do not know what I have lost." She left the bread and sugar on the counter and walked out. Outside, she found Harlan tying a sack of grain to the back of their wagon. He looked up, saw her face, and without a word, reached up and helped her into the seat. They rode home in silence, but his hand never left hers. The breaking point came a week later. They had barely finished supper when a knock came at the door. Levi Sutton, Harlan's younger brother, stood on the porch, hat in hand. "I need to speak to you," he said. Zella started to rise, but Harlan stopped her. "You stay." Levi stepped inside, glancing at Zella, then back to his brother. "I will say it plain," he said. "She cannot give you children. That is no small loss. You are wasting your name on her." Zella's fingers curled tight around the edge of the table. "I do not care about names," Harlan said. "What about legacy? Blood?" Harlan stood slowly. "You think I married her to pass down a name? I married her because I love her. Because I would rather live a childless life with her than a house full of sons with someone I do not." Levi looked stunned. He opened his mouth, then shut it. Harlan stepped forward. "You say one more word like that under my roof and you will not be stepping back in." Levi left. Harlan closed the door and locked it. Zella stood, heart pounding. "You did not have to say all that." "I meant every word," he said. She stepped close to him. "I do not deserve you." "You deserve better than this town," he whispered. The next day they packed up what they could. Sold the small herd, said their quiet goodbyes to the few who had stood by them. They set out east toward the Gallatin Valley, where Harlan had heard of a small ranch for sale, a place tucked against the base of the mountains where the land was soft, the soil rich. Along the trail they stopped at a half-burned homestead. The place looked abandoned, but as Harlan rode ahead to check, he found something that made his heart twist: a boy. No older than 6, crouched in the barn, arms wrapped tight around a crying girl, maybe 3. Zella slid from her saddle, eyes wide. "Are they alone?" Harlan nodded. "Looks like it." Zella knelt beside them. "Hey there, sweetheart," she said gently. "What are your names?" The boy's voice shook. "Zeke, this is my sister, Zadie." "Where are your parents, Zeke?" Zella asked. The boy looked away. "Gone, they left." Zella's chest tightened. She looked at Harlan. He gave a small nod. "We will not leave you," she told them. They made room in the wagon, shared what little food they had. Zadie clung to Zella like she had always belonged there. Zeke watched Harlan with careful eyes, but by the second night he rode beside him on the trail, asking about horses and how to hold the reins. When they reached the Gallatin Valley 2 days later, the sky was wide and blue. The ranch was rough, fences broken, fields wild, but it was theirs. Harlan carried Zadie in his arms as Zella helped Zeke down from the wagon. "This is home now," Harlan said. Zella looked up at him. "Even with them, especially with them." They worked side by side, mending, planting, making a life. Zadie followed Zella everywhere, her tiny hands always busy, always near. Zeke helped Harlan fix the barn, learning to hammer, to ride, to trust. One night, as they sat by the fire, Zella looked across the flame at Harlan. "I never thought I would have a family." He reached across, taking her hand. "You always had one, just needed time to find it." She leaned into him, his arm wrapping around her. The children slept nearby, safe and warm, and for the first time in years, Zella felt whole. The spring thaw came late to the Gallatin Valley that year. Snow still clung to the edges of the creek banks, and the ground stayed soft underfoot, a slow give of earth that made fence post digging near impossible. Still, Harlan drove each post in with steady arms, the muscles along his back taut beneath his shirt. Zeke followed behind, dragging lengths of wire, his small boots sinking with every step. "You reckon wolves'll come this close?" the boy asked without looking up. "Could." "But not if this fence holds," Harlan said, pausing to check a knot. "They go for easy pickings. This'll keep the steers tighter." Zeke squinted at the woods. "I could watch him at night, keep a lamp lit." Harlan laid a hand on Zeke's shoulder. "That's my job, yours is growing strong." "You do that, and I'll handle the wolves." Zeke nodded, his shoulders squaring slightly back at the house. Zella stood near the hearth, sleeves rolled to her elbows, her palms dusted with flour. She leaned over the table as she pressed dough into a rough circle. Zadie perched on a stool beside her, watching with the heavy stillness only a child trying not to be in the way could manage. "Why you press it like that?" Zadie asked. "Makes it rise proper," Zella said. "The bread's got to breathe a little." Zadie tilted her head. "Does it got lungs?" Zella laughed softly, brushing a spot of flour onto the girl's nose. "No, just a kind of life that happens when you treat it right." They ate together that evening, the bread warm, the butter softening quick against its crust. Zadie sat between them, cheeks smudged with crumbs, and Zeke leaned into Harlan's side, too tired to talk much. Later, when the children were put to bed and the fire had burned low, Zella stepped out onto the porch. The wind had calmed and the stars were thick overhead. Harlan joined her, his hand brushing lightly against hers before settling there for good. "I saw you looking east earlier," he said. "I was thinking about my mother," she said, voice quieter than the night around them. "She never saw mountains, said they were too far, too big. I think she meant it in more ways than one." He didn't answer right away, just stood beside her, watching the dark stretch of hills beyond the pasture. "You think she would have understood this life?" he asked. Zella leaned her shoulder against his. "I think she would have envied it. She stayed in one place her whole life and still never felt at home. I didn't understand that until I lost the last baby." He turned toward her, the lines at the corners of his eyes soft. "I felt like my body had betrayed me," she went on, "like I was a guest in it, not the owner. The women back in Judith made sure I never forgot it." "You're not a guest here," he said. "Not in this house, not in this life. You've built more than anyone else ever gave you credit for." She looked up at him then, and the weight of all the quiet years between loss and healing sat heavy between them, but his gaze never wavered. "I want to file the land claim next week," he said. "Make it official." Her brow lifted. "You sure? This place is ours. No one's coming to take it. Might as well put our names on the deed." She nodded, and for the first time since they arrived, she felt the stirrings of something solid beneath her rib cage, not hope exactly, but something close enough to it. 2 mornings later, a wagon rolled down the road from the north, wheels kicking up a low trail of dust. Harlan stepped out from the barn, rubbing his hands on a rag, and Zella shielded her eyes from the sun to see who it was. The man who climbed down was gray-bearded, his jacket patched at the elbows, but his boots still well-oiled. He carried himself like someone used to giving orders, though the stiffness in his gait spoke of long years in the saddle. "Name's Emery Blanton," he said after nodding to Harlan. "I heard tell from a trader that a Sutton had taken up land down this way. You from the Judith Basin?" "I am," Harlan said, eyes narrowing slightly. "Why?" Blanton pulled off his gloves. "I got a mare I can't settle, good blood but skittish, won't let my hands near her. Trader said you had a quiet way with animals, thought I'd see if that was true." Zella stepped down from the porch, brushing her hands on her skirt. "What's she been through?" Blanton looked at her, surprised. "Storm spooked her. Barren came down halfway. She ran near 2 days before we found her." "Been trouble since?" Zella exchanged a glance with Harlan, then nodded. "Bring her round, we'll see what she's got left in her." Blanton returned the next day with the sorrel mare. Zeke watched from the gate, arms folded. Zadie clung to Zella's skirts, wide-eyed. The mare shivered when Harlan approached, whites of her eyes flashing, but he didn't reach for her, just stood near, letting her breathe, letting her see him. "She's not mean," Zella murmured, "just hunted by something she can't name." "Like most of us," he said. By the week's end, the mare stood calm enough to be brushed. Blanton came back with 2 sacks of oats and a nod of respect. "You've done more than I figured possible," he said. "I got neighbors need help with their stock, word'll spread." Harlan met Zella's eyes. "We could use the work," she smiled, tired but sure. "Then let it spread." That night they sat out beneath the same stars, the air warmer now, the trees beginning to bud. Zadie slept with her head on Zella's lap. Zeke leaned against the porch rail, fighting sleep. "You think we'll stay here forever?" he asked. Harlan looked to Zella, then back to the boy. "That's the plan," Zeke nodded slowly. "Good, I don't want to learn another fence line." Zella chuckled, stroking Zadie's hair. "Then we best make this one last." And in the hush of that spring night, with the scent of earth rising and the warmth of laughter still lingering, the 4 of them sat close, bound not by blood, but by the quiet, unshakable choice to belong to one another. By late June, the land had taken on the deep green of early summer, and the air smelled of warm pine and wet dirt. Afternoon storms came fast and heavy, but cleared quick, leaving the sky scrubbed clean and the fields glistening. The land was working under them, not against them, and that quiet shift made something ease open in Zella's chest that she hadn't realized was still closed. She stood near the root cellar, apron full of turnips and beets, when she spotted Zeke pulling something from the barn side wall. She walked over, brushing soil from her hands. "What's that you've got?" He held it out, palms up. It was a rusted horseshoe, edges worn smooth. "Found it wedged in the boards, might have been there since the last folks." She turned it over in her hand. "You believe in luck," Zeke shrugged. "Don't much think about it." She handed it back. "That's probably best." He tucked it into his pocket and looked toward the pasture. "Mr. Sutton said I could help with the branding when we're ready." Zella nodded. "He wouldn't say it if he didn't mean it." Zeke's posture straightened a little, and he took off at a run toward the creek where Harlan was repairing a broken gatepost. Inside, Zadie sat curled in the shade by the hearth, a pile of buttons spread out before her. She had taken to sorting them by size and color, whispering stories to herself as she moved them. Zella watched from the doorway and didn't interrupt. That evening, after the children were asleep, Harlan came in from the barn, boots damp and shirt clinging to his back. He moved slow, like the day had left a weight in his bones. Zella poured him coffee and set it beside him without a word. He sipped and leaned back in the chair, closing his eyes for a moment. "Fence held through the storm," he said, voice low. "South line'll need better stakes before the river rises again." She sat across from him, hands folded. "We've got time before the worst of the melt." He glanced at her over the rim of his cup. "You remember that first spring in Judith, when the cow got herself stuck in the bog and we spent near an hour trying to haul her out?" Zella smiled. "And you lost your boot in the mud, walked home with one foot squelching the whole way." He chuckled, the sound soft. "I remember wondering if you'd laugh at me or leave me." "I did laugh," she said, "but I stayed." He reached across the table, fingers brushing hers. "You always do." She took his hand not out of habit but because the moment asked for it. A few days later, a pair of riders appeared from the west, their coats dusted white with trail salt. Harlan met them near the gate, rifle across his back but held low. Zella stood at the porch with Zadie behind her skirts. The older rider tipped his hat. "Name's Calder. This here's my nephew, Tom. We're passing through from Bozeman, headed toward Big Timber. Heard you might be buying cattle." Harlan nodded once. "Heard right. We've got 6 head good condition, lost a 7th to a bad leg. We'd let the lot go for fair trade and feed." Zella stepped forward. "You'll stay the night," Calder glanced at his nephew. "If it's no trouble." "None," she said. "We've room in the loft and stew on the fire." That night, Tom cleaned his boots twice before stepping into the house. He was younger than he looked at first glance, early 20s at most, with a nervous energy that made him glance around the room like he might miss something important. Zadie watched him from under her blanket, thumb tucked in her mouth. During supper, Calder spoke plainly about the roads ahead, the trouble he'd seen near the Yellowstone, and the price of oats in Bozeman. Harlan listened, nodded, but said little. After the meal, while Zella cleared tin bowls and wiped the table, Calder approached her near the stove. "I misjudged the trail," he said. "We're low on provisions and shorter on coin. I wouldn't ask, but Zella handed him a cloth sack of bread and dried apples without waiting for him to finish. It's a long ride to Big Timber. You'll need it." He looked at her, his eyes worn but kind. "You and your husband built something good here," she nodded once. "We did." The next morning, Zeke helped Tom load the horses. The boy asked questions about the trail, how far Big Timber was, whether the mountains looked different from the other side. Tom answered all of them, his voice steadier now. After the riders left, Zella found Harlan sitting on the porch rail watching the dust settle. "You think they'll make it?" she asked. He took a moment. "They've got enough between the two of them." She sat beside him, pulling her shawl tighter. "I didn't think we'd be the kind of place people stopped through." "Maybe they don't stop," he said. "Maybe they just pass through enough to remember it later." She looked out across the pasture where the cattle grazed slow and undisturbed. "I don't want to be remembered," she said. "I want to live long enough to see Zeke break a colt and Zadie chase after him with a ribbon in her hair." Harlan turned to her. "Then we'll be here, as long as it takes." She leaned against him, their shoulders touching, the morning sun warming the porch boards beneath their boots. The fence line shimmered under the first heat of summer, and the wind carried the sound of creek water over stone. No one came that day. No one needed to. The house held 4 hearts now, and that was more than enough. July settled in dry and bright, the kind of summer that cracked the ground in shallow lines and left sweat clinging behind ears and along shirt collars. Zella had taken to rising before dawn to beat the heat, often out in the garden before the robins stirred, her skirts brushing through rows of squash and pole beans. She'd begun drying herbs on the windowsill yarrow for fevers, mint for calming children when the heat made them restless. That morning she was stripping sage leaves when a wagon rolled in from the north trail. A single mule, sway-backed but steady, pulled it. The driver was an older woman, skin weathered deep, her gray braid looped twice at the nape of her neck. She wore a calico dress faded to near parchment, and her boots bore the dust of long travel. Zella stepped away from the porch, hands drying on her apron. "You lost," the woman shook her head. "Looking for a place called Sutton's Corner. Was told it was a good place to trade for medicine and clean water." Zella met her gaze. "We don't call it that, but you found the land." The woman climbed down with a grunt. "Name's Dorothea Pierce. My son's got a cough, won't quit. We're camped 2 miles back near the cottonwoods. Saw smoke from your chimney. Figured I'd try." Zella motioned toward the porch. "Come in. You'll need something cool to drink." Inside, Zella poured spring water into a tin cup and set it down with willow bark and honey. Dorothea's hands trembled slightly as she drank. "I buried 5 children before I saw 30, the woman said without prompting. "One lived, that boy out by the river, he's all I got. I'd walk through fire before I'd lose him too." Zella nodded once and opened the cedar box where she kept her dried roots and poultices. "You'll need to boil this with water and let him breathe the steam. Keep his head raised when he sleeps, and no cold water." Dorothea studied her. "You a midwife?" "Used to be," Zella said, "before the land took more from me than I could bear." The older woman didn't offer pity. She simply reached for the pouch Zella held out and tucked it into her satchel. "I'll send eggs back in the morning, and maybe salt pork if I can spare it." Zella's voice stayed soft. "We didn't trade." Dorothea paused at the door. "Then I'll call it thanks." After she left, Zella stood at the window, watching the trail long after the mule's steps had faded. She didn't turn when Harlan came in, just leaned slightly as his hand slid across her back. "You helped her," he said. "She reminded me of something I try not to remember." "What's that?" "What it's like to carry hope when you've no reason to." He rested his chin against her temple. "You carried it for both of us. That's why we're here." That evening, Zadie sat cross-legged in the yard, arranging rocks in a spiral while Zeke split kindling nearby. He glanced up. "You think that boy's gonna be all right?" Zella didn't answer at first. She sat down beside him, picking up a scrap of bark. "I think his mother's strong. That counts for more than medicine sometimes." Zeke studied her face. "You ever get scared when folks come around needing things?" "All the time," she said, "but fear and kindness aren't at odds. You can carry both." Later, after lanterns were doused and the porch cooled under the rising moon, Zella sat beside Harlan with her legs tucked beneath her. He was oiling his saddle, movement steady. "I've been thinking about the name," she said. He looked up. "What name?" "The one she used." "Sutton's Corner." His brow lifted. "It's not wrong," she said. "It's a place where people pass through and we offer what we can. That's a kind of corner, isn't it? Something dependable." He set the cloth down and leaned back. "You think we're ready to be known like that?" "I think we already are. Might as well own it." He watched her for a long moment, then reached for her hand. "If we're naming things, I'd like to build a sign, one with your name, too." "You've done as much building here as I have." She traced her fingertip along the grain of the porch rail. "Zella Norwood Sutton," she said softly. "It still feels new." "It fits," he said. "Like this place fits us." She turned toward him then, her expression open in a way it rarely was, the lines around her eyes softened not by time but by trust. "I stopped praying for children a long time ago," she said, "but I didn't know I could still pray for peace. Or that I'd find it." He didn't say anything, just brushed his thumb along the back of her hand and let the silence settle, full and unbroken. The kind of silence that held no ache, no apology. Behind them, the wind stirred the prairie grass. A coyote called far off, and the stars blinked steady above the roof they'd built with their own hands. Whatever came next, they'd meet it together. That much, finally, was certain. By the time August reached its peak, the grass had browned to gold, and the earth gave off that dry, steady scent of sun-baked soil. The creek ran low but still moved, and the trees along its edge held their green like a promise. Zella stood barefoot in the shade of the cottonwood, watching her skirt hem sway in the breeze, a basket of washed linens at her feet. From the garden came Zadie's soft humming as she plucked peas into a tin pail. Not far off, Harlan's voice carried low as he walked Zeke through how to check hooves for rot. "You see that dark line there?" Harlan asked. "That's where you watch. Any deeper, you clean it out." Zeke crouched, brow creased, not rushing. "How do you know when it's bad?" "You'll smell it before you see it," Harlan said. "Always trust your nose." Zella turned back to the house and hung the damp linens over the line stretched between two posts. Each cloth moved with the wind, slow and sure, like sails on a quiet lake. When she stepped back inside, the kitchen held warmth from the preserved jars cooling on the counter. She'd been putting up beans and beets, enough to carry them through winter, and the shelves below the stairs now held rows of color amber, ruby, moss. That evening, a letter arrived by way of a trader passing through. He'd stopped just long enough to water his team and hand off the folded paper, its edges worn soft. It was addressed to Zella, and she read it slowly with her palm pressed flat against the table. "It's from Mrs. Harrow," she said at last, glancing up at Harlan. He set his shaving strop aside. "The midwife from Judith, she's retired. Moved out near Helena to live with her niece. Says she kept thinking of me. Wants to visit before the frost comes. You want her to come?" Zella folded the letter back carefully. I think I do. There's a quiet in her I always trusted. That fall, the trees turned late. The maples along the creek flared gold into October, and Zeke took to carving animals from scrap wood, leaving them in the windowsill for Zadie to find. She lined them up on her shelf: a bear, a mule, a dog with one ear, and gave each a name: Mrs. Harrow arrived just past dusk one evening, her coat lined with rabbit fur and her boots caked with road dust. She walked with a carved cane and a slow, deliberate gait. "You've made a place for yourself," she said as Zella helped her down. "We did it together," Zella said, nodding toward the house. At supper, Mrs. Harrow spoke little, but her eyes followed the children with something soft and distant behind them. After the meal, as the children were put to bed and the oil lamp turned low, she reached for Zella's hand. "I watched you bury more than a woman should," she said. "And I never said enough. I see now what you built from that grief." Zella's throat went tight. "I stopped waiting for the pain to ease. I just started living around it." And now, Zella looked toward Harlan, who sat carving beside the hearth, the firelight catching in the lines around his eyes. "Now I don't feel like I'm carrying it alone." Mrs. Harrow stayed 4 days, enough to walk the property, rest her joints, and pass along a few herbs Zella hadn't grown herself. When she left, she pressed her hands to Zella's cheeks. "You've made peace with the land," she said. "That's rarer than most understand." Snow came early that year, soft and slow, blanketing the fields before the last of the leaves had dropped. Zella and Harlan packed the root cellar with smoked meat and dried fruit. Zeke helped patch the roof over the coop. Zadie learned to knit clumsily, her tiny hands making crooked rows that Zella wore anyway, a scarf uneven and precious. One night near Thanksgiving, Harlan stood with Zella by the window, watching snow fall against the dark. "I want to build something more," he said. "A room off the back. Bigger kitchen, maybe a space for guests." Zella leaned into him. "You thinking of anyone in particular?" He nodded. "Children grow fast, and you've got more to teach than this house can hold," she smiled. "I like the sound of that." He turned her gently then, his hands warm on her waist, pulling her close. "I want our names carved into the porch rail, not just mine. You think someone will come looking for us? I think someday someone will come needing what we found here. They'll need to know we were real." She laid her hand against his chest, feeling the steady beat beneath. "Then carve it deep." That winter passed in quiet beauty. No sickness came, no hardship pressed harder than they could bear. Letters came from Levy short, respectful, apologizing in their own way. Zella answered with firm kindness, inviting him to visit come spring. By March, the snow had melted to puddles, and Zadie chased chickens with a squeal while Zeke practiced riding bareback in the pasture. The new kitchen was framed, and Harlan's hands bore calluses deeper than before. At night, he and Zella sat close under quilts, her head on his shoulder, his fingers tracing hers. One morning, after the frost finally cleared from the windows, Zella painted their names into the porch rail: Harlan and Zella Sutton in clean, black strokes. Below it, she added the year they first met, and beside that, the year they'd made this land their own. When Harlan saw it, he only said, "That's right," and kissed her like he'd known her in every life before this one and would know her in every life after. They grew old there, among the hills and the ash trees, and the house bore their laughter, their quarrels, their long silences and longer reconciliations. Zeke became a strong young man with steady hands, and he stayed on, building his own cabin just across the pasture. Zadie grew into a clever girl with a stubborn streak and a gift for healing. And when she married, she did it in the garden under the cottonwood tree, where Zella had once stood barefoot with a basket of linens and a heart just beginning to settle. The porch rail weathered, but the names never faded. And long after their hands were still, the house remained warm, tended, and filled with the quiet strength of two people who had loved each other completely through all seasons until the very end.